Hi, let's talk about witch farms. Well, finally. So many people have been asking about the witch farms I built in my perimeter in my Let's Play series, and I've always dismissed those questions by saying that, nah, the farm is not good enough and stuff like that. And, well, yeah, it's true, but I spent a few weeks now to try to optimize it as much as I can, and I guess this is as good as it will ever get, so let's talk about how it works. And we'll start by looking at a completely stripped down, bare bones prototype that is just gonna show off the mechanism that we're working with. And of course, this won't work as a proper witch farm because it's not even dark in here, and we're in the middle of the day, so nothing will spawn right now. So for demonstration, let's start the machine, add a witch manually, and see what happens to it. So the witch would spawn on any of these platforms. Eventually, the piston feed tapes that are pushing these blocks around would push a block of soul sand under the witch's feet. And soul sand is slightly lower than the stone next to it, so when the stone blocks gets pushed into the witch's feet, it gets pushed around together with the soul sand blocks. Then when it reaches here, instead of being pushed into the wall, which the game doesn't like, it falls through the soul sand block and onto the blocks below. Now, this piston feed tape rotates in this direction, and this piston feed tape below rotates in the other direction. So when it falls through here, it lands on this block. Eventually, a soul sand block comes, and the witch falls through that one because it was already standing here, and then it gets brought here where it hits the wall and falls through. And below we just have a very simple fall damage pickup system. Let's turn off the light so that we can see this farm working, well, more like intended and have witches spawn in here. Let's just see what problems there are with this farm and what we can do to improve it. So I'm gonna stand here, which is far enough to let the witches spawn, and I'm gonna use free cam so we can look a little bit closer at what's going on. We can already see, for example, this witch is a problem. When they start pathfinding, I have figured out, they will not fall through the soul sand. That's one of the biggest problems, actually, because this witch will probably eventually despawn, like it did just there. Another problem is that this is designed for fall damage, so you have to have a big hole below it, and that means that your AFK spot has to be 128 blocks above, and that means that you have to spawn-proof everything, so this probably only works in a proper perimeter. Also, the spawn rates are quite terrible, and it needs a roof just so we can get the light levels down. That's a few of the problems. But we also need to think about the major problem that makes this farm not work as good as a shifting floor design, because technically, this is a shifting floor design, except we're shifting the floors all the time. And yes, this is also one of the problems is slight lag that is caused by the pistons moving so much, and I think it's on the graphics side, because I haven't seen server-side lag. Well, that's not true. I have seen server-side lag from the pistons, but it usually is quite extreme, and is solved by a server restart. I have no idea why that happens, but sometimes it happens. It generally only happens when my server has been up for 2 weeks or 3 weeks without restart, so it's not a huge deal. I should probably restart this a bit more often. But yeah, the spawn rates are quite terrible right now. I think in this version we are maybe at 2000 items per hour or less. I didn't even bother measuring this too much because it is, of course, relatively bad and we need to improve it. But let's talk about one of the major problems here, but we can't really do it in this farm, so I have a temporary setup here where I can demonstrate what's going on. And to see what's going on and what the problem with this kind of farm is, we need to use a feature of the carpet mod, and we're going to be testing what can spawn on this block. So this exact block here, I can do spawn list. On this block, nothing will fit, of course, we have to remove the slab. And I can do it again, and we can see a bunch of things can spawn on this block. And of course, we're not in a witch hut, so we're not limited to witches, but that doesn't matter because this works the same way, regardless of witch hut or not. So let's freeze the time. And we can still see that things spawn here normally. Well, can spawn here. They don't spawn right now because I'm too close and the time is frozen. I extend this piston. For now, nothing happens. Things can still spawn normally. I step one tick. The piston has started extending, and now we can check if things can spawn here, and it turns out they can't. I move time forward one more tick, and things can spawn normally again. This means that every time that the piston feed tape moves, it stops all spawns from happening in the farm. So ideally, we want to move the piston feed tape as rarely as possible, but without the witches despawning before they reach the bottom, of course. And also, the witches that are standing inside the farm are preventing other witches from spawning on the same block. So we kind of need to find a sweet spot for removing them as fast as possible from the farm, but moving the floor as little as possible. Some of you might know that I'm very much an experimental guy. I don't do the math on these kinds of problems because I don't think that we can take all the variables into account anyway. So I have just experimented, and in that witch farm here, yes, this is a double witch hut perimeter, just because I wanted to have a seed like that for doing the tests here. In that witch farm, I have more or less experimentally optimized the clock. Maybe it can be improved slightly because I have done other changes after optimizing the clock, but I think that clock is doing things correctly. This is the more or less finalized design that I have spent a ridiculous amount of time optimizing, even though I know that pushing the blocks too much will make this always worse than a shifting floor design. But I like the simplicity of the idea, and it's my design. I like it, that's why I'm using it, even though I know it's not perfect, but not every single farm needs to be perfect. So let's talk about which improvements we have here. First, the obvious one, we have a big roof. The roof is to provide darkness inside the farm, obviously. And the roof only extends as much as it needs to. This block, if I remove it, we will get a daylight level of 1 on this block, so all of these blocks are pretty much exactly where they should be. Maybe this layer is unnecessary, but it makes the whole roof look symmetrical, and that is also important. We can't have farms that look too stupid. Another thing I have added here are these platforms here, and they are here for two reasons. Reason number one is that it's just convenient to have an access here and be able to work here. And another reason is pack spawning. And I'm not exactly sure if pack spawning really does apply to a witch farm. I guess if the pack starts within the witch farm, then travels outside the witch farm, and then travels back into the witch farm, that would still make sense for pack spawning. So probably this helps. This doesn't help as much as I hope it would. Compared to that one, this farm in this exact version is getting 3,700 drops per hour compared to 2,000 drops per hour in that one. Ish. I didn't measure that one too carefully. This probably helps as well, although not that much, because the difference between this platform sticking out 2 blocks and whatever this amount of blocks is, like 6 or 7, is microscopic. Maybe 100 drops per hour more, and that's very, very dubious statistics. Another optimization that this farm has are these walls of glass. They definitely help prevent the witches from pathfinding, especially on this platform where there are no trapdoors. We're going to get to the trapdoors in a second. As you saw there in the example I showed, when a witch starts pathfinding, it will be less likely or sometimes never fall through the floor. The glass definitely helps prevent pathfinding, but not always. They still do pathfind. And to solve the pathfinding issues, I have actually found that 2 rows of soul sand next to each other does not help, but 3 definitely help. So even the witches that start walking around in here when they're on 3 blocks of soul sand like this, and then this row of stone comes along, it usually pushes them down. Not always, but usually. For the platforms above the lowest platform, to help the issue even more, I have trapdoors like this. This keeps the witches in here and makes them much more likely to be pushed down. On these 2 floors with the trapdoors, the witches get pushed down almost immediately when they get hit by the stone blocks. Another improvement, like I just mentioned, is that I slow down the clock. This is experimentally arrived. Yes, it's a very convenient number of ticks on every repeater. This gives us the best rates. It doesn't really matter if I set these 2 repeaters to 1 tick, for example. It's pretty much the same rates, but I'm running it as slow as possible. Another optimization that I did that didn't really have as much impact as I hoped was to remove all the blocks, well, all the unnecessary solid blocks at foot level where they spawn, because that can interrupt pack spawning. I'm still not sure if pack spawning is very relevant to this, and I'm not sure if the pistons are actually a problem. They probably are, and, well, these pistons cannot be removed because that's how the piston feed tape works. And the roof is aligned so that it is at foot level here that we have the slabs. I was testing if it matters if we have full solid blocks here or if the stairs and slabs are sufficient, and it seems that the stairs and slabs have the exact same properties as full blocks on this level. So we're keeping it as stairs because it makes it look a little better. Unfortunately, this bit of the roof cannot be made lower because we have the pistons, and yeah, the piston feed tape is going just under this layer, and to cover up the pistons properly, because pistons let light through when they're moving, so we need to cover them up like this. As for the killing chamber for the witches, instead of doing fall damage like we have there, which would require an AFK spot relatively close to the ground, which would mean an enormous amount of spawn proofing or a perimeter, we are using an entity cramming system. So on this hopper here, we have 24 minecarts, so as soon as a witch falls down into this, it gets crammed and dies relatively quickly. And as for getting the witches from when they fall down here into the cramming chamber, we are using another piston feed tape. This time we're using a slab and a fence. So fences are much better at pushing around the witches than the soul sand and stone, but fences are not, unfortunately, not spawnable, so we cannot use them in here. Or theoretically we could if we just had one row of fences in the entire piston feed tape. That wouldn't reduce the number of spawning spaces too much, and it definitely guarantees that the witches will be caught by the piston feed tape. But I think this performs better. To be honest, I have not performed a test with just one row of fence case to see if that actually improved performance. The original version of this farm did actually have the fences. And that might actually be something worth keeping in mind if spawning in Witch Farm somehow changes in the future and soul sand for some reason becomes non-spawnable or maybe becomes a full-sized block and this mechanism no longer works. We can use fences to push around mobs in a farm of this type. And that's what we're doing here with this piston feed tape. The redstone in here is a weird mashup of me trying to be like the cool kids and using rails for everything. And in some places I have replaced this with redstone. And if you have seen my Let's Play series where I actually built the previous version of this farm, all this is rails, there's lots of rails, there's also a lot of observers here. I did remove the observers on top of these pistons as an experiment to see if that would interfere with pack spawning or not, and well, to be honest, that didn't really change too much, but now I'm keeping the redstone because it doesn't really seem to matter for performance. This might actually even perform slightly better than the previous version, not significantly, so it's nothing to write home about, but maybe there is a microscopic improvement. And same thing here. Random rails, random observers. The problem is that we need to power the pistons for the piston feed tape. It's not very symmetrical how the pistons are laid out. So for example, the pistons that are pushing the blocks here are all powered at the same time. through these target blocks. The pistons here are powered slightly differently because they're powered from below. The pistons here need to be... Oh, we can't even really see them without removing this stuff. They are powered from the side, but then we can't really power these blocks in any other way than observers looking down at a rail. There is a good reason why the redstone is so eclectic, because we can't make it symmetrical because this machine is not symmetrical because of the piston feed tapes. And especially also because the piston feed tapes are counter-rotating. So one is rotating clockwise and the other one is rotating counterclockwise. Now, in case you want to build this farm or just experiment with this and see maybe if you can improve something that I have missed, there will be, of course, a world download in the description of the video. And if you actually want to build one, I will show you the general idea for how to use the cramming version, of course, because this is built for not a perimeter. This is built so you can drop this farm down in your world relatively early without too much hassle. Let's go to a new world and just build up this farm so we can see how to spawn-proof and how to prepare everything. I created a completely new world, found a swamp hat, and we need to figure out how to place our farm. For this, I am going to use the mini-HUD mod to show me the bounding boxes of structures. You don't need this strictly. Just remember that the bounding box looks like this, and the corner of the bounding box is here. So we want our first spawning platform to start just under this corner, from this pillar here. And the other corner would be this many blocks here. So this would be the other corner of the bottom spawning platform. And the top spawning platform is going to end up, let me measure correctly, it will be here. So it will have one box of the witch hut above it. And this is how it needs to be so that we can have 3 spawning platforms. And you need to make a decent hole. I made this one way too big just to have more space. You can get away with a much smaller hole. Doesn't have to be too deep either. I think I'm down to Y level 55. You could probably get away with not even making it this deep. I just wanted some space so we can show exactly what's going on here. And I am using Litematica to take blueprints and, well, especially in creative worlds, to just place them. In survival, this really helps to place the builds exactly. And it's a little bit awkward trying to place this so that the bounding box works correctly. As you can see, I can't really see the bounding box through the blueprint, but it is there. And I made sure, this will be much more clear after I have placed this structure, but I made sure that the bounding box starts just above this block and until this block, because this is the spawning platform. The block below here is not within the witch hut, and the block here is within the witch hut. And that allows us to have the upper part of the bounding box of the witch hut just above these blocks, which is the top spawning platform of the farm. After you've built it, don't forget that you need to place 24 minecarts on this rail. So you just target the rail and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 23, 24. Let's add a few more because that doesn't hurt and it could help. Now, the AFK spot for this farm is quite important to get it right if you want to avoid spawn-proofing too much. You don't want to have the AFK spot just above the farm, so above where the witches are spawning, because placing blocks there will affect spawn rates. But move out maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks out. And from here, this is at the same level where the minecarts are. We start measuring from here, so the Y level here is 56. And if you go up to exactly, and I have measured this already, as you can see, I am using the mini-HUD distance measurement tool just to make sure that I get everything right. At Y level 182, I am less than 128 blocks away from that minecart, and this is important because that's where the witches would despawn if they fall down. All the other parts of the farm should be in range of this spot as well. And here again, I am using the mini-HUD mod just to see how much area I need to spawn-proof. And in general, in your survival world, you should just basically spawn-proof a little bit more than this and just see if anything spawns. Remember that you are in a swamp, so slimes will spawn, so your best bet is to just remove everything. Torches might not be enough, so just remove all this. It's not too much that you need to remove. And check under here if there are any caves within the despawn sphere. Generally, there shouldn't be because we are not going very deep, but just double check. It's definitely not much. Use your favorite method of finding out how much you need to spawn proof. But as you can see, there isn't much here. I need to spawn proof this, so probably just light it up with torches and stuff like that. And there you go. You have a working witch farm. That should cover everything. In case you want to build this, there will be a world download in the description. I'm really curious if anybody has any ideas for how I can improve this even further. Leave a comment. Let me know if you have any good ideas. And if you have any questions, well, leave a comment as well, and I'll try to answer anything I understand. But other than that, thanks a lot for watching, and have a good witch farming. Bye!